A $90,000 salary is supposed to feel like progress. On paper, it is $20,000 more than $70,000, and for most people, that difference looks decisive. Yet many workers who cross this threshold report a surprising outcome: less financial breathing room, more pressure, and a constant sense that money disappears faster than before. This is not a psychological anomaly, it is a structural financial problem. The core issue is that income is evaluated in isolation, while costs adjust automatically around it. When people move from $70,000 to $90,000, they assume the extra $20,000 will translate into savings, flexibility, or comfort. In practice, the opposite often happens. The higher salary triggers changes in job structure, expectations, and daily routines that raise expenses and reduce usable income. Most people believe they are doing everything right. They accepted a better offer. They advanced their career. They followed the logic that higher pay equals higher security. What they usually do not calculate is how much the new role costs to maintain. This is where the mistake begins. Start with taxes. The jump from $70,000 to $90,000 does not produce a full $20,000 increase in take home pay. Depending on location and filing status, the net gain may be closer to $13,000, $14,000. That is the actual amount available to improve financial outcomes. Now layer in structural costs. Many $90,000 roles come with reduced flexibility. Office presence becomes mandatory. Commute frequency increases. Work hours become less predictable. Transportation alone can add $4,000, $6,000 per year. Workday food and convenience spending often add another $3,000. Professional appearance, networking expectations, and role-related upgrades can add $2,000, $3,000 more. Time pressure leads to paid services that were unnecessary before, quietly absorbing another $2,000, $3,000. When these numbers are combined, the math becomes clear. A net income increase of roughly $13,000 is met with $10,000, $15,000 in new recurring costs. In many cases, the raise is fully neutralized. In some cases, it is reversed. The result is a higher salary with less margin. This is why the experience feels worse, not better. Financial stress increases because fixed costs rise. Expectations increase because the role demands more availability and performance. Optionality decreases because the lifestyle now requires a higher minimum income to sustain. None of this feels like a mistake at the moment it happens. Each adjustment appears reasonable on its own. The most misleading part is perception. From the outside, the person looks more successful. Internally, the financial system has become tighter. Savings do not grow. Time feels scarce. The sense of progress fades despite higher pay. This problem is not caused by poor budgeting or lack of discipline. It is caused by evaluating income without evaluating the cost structure attached to it. Until those costs are made visible, many people will continue to chase higher salaries and wonder why the results feel disappointing. The gap between gross income and usable financial progress is where the real problem lies. To understand why a $90,000 salary can feel worse than $70,000, it is necessary to look beyond income and examine how the structure of work reshapes spending and behavior. The problem does not come from bad choices in isolation. It comes from a system that changes automatically as income crosses certain thresholds. Income increases are discrete and visible. Lifestyle costs, by contrast, are continuous and diffuse. When someone moves into a higher paying role, expenses rarely jump all at once. They accumulate through small, justified adjustments: a slightly better apartment closer to work, more frequent meals purchased during the workday because time is limited, transportation choices that prioritize reliability over cost, paid services that replace time once used for personal tasks. None of these decisions feel extravagant. Together, they redefine the baseline cost of living. Behavior plays a central role. At $70,000, many people still actively protect their margin. They plan meals, tolerate longer commutes, and preserve flexibility. At $90,000, the internal narrative changes. The higher salary is seen as permission to remove friction. Convenience becomes a rational expense rather than a luxury. Over time, spending decisions are no longer evaluated individually. They are justified by identity. This is what someone in this role does. Consider a simple scenario. A worker earning $70,000 has a flexible schedule and works partially remotely. Monthly transportation and workday spending total $400. After accepting a $90,000 role, office presence becomes mandatory 4 to 5 days a week. Transportation costs rise to $600 per month. Food and convenience spending rise to $500. Appearance related expenses increase by $150. The monthly increase is $850, or just over $10,000 per year. This does not include time related services or higher housing costs that often follow. In this scenario, the raise still exists, but its function has changed. Instead of increasing savings or reducing stress, it is used to stabilize a more expensive structure. Financial pressure increases because the margin between income and fixed costs shrinks. The person earns more but feels less flexible. Standard advice fails because it focuses on behavior rather than structure. Suggestions like budget more carefully or cut discretionary spending assume that expenses are optional. In reality, many of the new costs are embedded in the role. Skipping lunches or refusing convenience repeatedly requires time and energy that the job no longer provides. Discipline is treated as the solution, even though the problem is systemic. Another common recommendation is to wait for the next raise. This ignores a critical pattern. Higher paying roles often escalate expectations faster than pay. More responsibility, longer availability, and greater visibility all increase time pressure. As income rises, the system that consumes it becomes more demanding. Waiting rarely restores margin. The deeper issue is the absence of a framework for evaluating net outcomes. Most people compare jobs by salary and benefits, not by how much usable income remains after the role's requirements are met. Without this framework, decisions are made with incomplete data. This is why the problem repeats across income levels. It is not a one-time adjustment, it is a pattern. Each salary increase reshapes behavior and costs unless actively constrained. Without a system to separate income growth from lifestyle expansion, higher pay can produce tighter finances, not better ones. The first major mistake is focusing on gross salary instead of net financial outcome. Most people treat a move from $70,000 to $90,000 as a $20,000 improvement. In reality, after taxes, the net increase is often closer to $13,000. This smaller number is then immediately exposed to higher recurring costs. Because the comparison stops at salary, the erosion of net benefit goes unnoticed. The second mistake is allowing lifestyle costs to scale automatically with income. New expenses are rarely questioned because they are framed as reasonable for the role. More frequent commuting, higher quality housing near work, convenience spending, professional appearance, and paid services are seen as part of moving up. The mistake is not spending more, it is failing to distinguish between optional upgrades and structural requirements. Once these costs become fixed, they reduce flexibility permanently. A third mistake is assuming that higher income creates a buffer against inefficiency. In practice, higher income often increases exposure. At $70,000, inefficiencies are felt quickly and corrected. At $90,000, inefficiencies are absorbed silently. The system becomes less sensitive to waste, allowing costs to compound over time. This creates a situation where earnings rise, but financial control weakens. The long-term consequences are best understood through projection. Assume the $90,000 role introduces $12,000 per year in additional recurring costs compared to the $70,000 role. Over 5 years, that is $60,000 in reduced surplus. Over 10 years, $120,000. Over 20 years, $240,000. These figures assume costs remain stable, which is unlikely. In many cases, they increase as expectations rise. Now consider opportunity cost. If the $12,000 per year had been preserved and invested at a conservative 5% annual return, the difference becomes more pronounced. After 10 years, the foregone value approaches $155,000. After 20 years, it exceeds $400,000. This gap is not caused by poor investment choices. It is caused by a decision framework that prioritizes income over efficiency. To illustrate that income itself is not the problem, compare two simplified scenarios. Person A earns $90,000 and absorbs $12,000 per year in role-driven costs, leaving limited surplus. Person B earns $70,000 in a more flexible role with only $3,000 in additional lifestyle costs. Over 10 years, Person B often accumulates more savings and investment capital despite lower pay. The difference is not ambition or discipline, it is structure. Another consequence is reduced optionality. Higher fixed costs increase the minimum income required to maintain stability. This makes career changes riskier and negotiations harder. People stay in roles longer than planned because exiting feels financially dangerous. Over time, this locks them into a system that prioritizes income continuity over wealth building. The core conclusion is straightforward. The discomfort felt at higher income levels is not a paradox. It is the predictable result of decisions made without evaluating net outcomes. The issue is not that $90,000 is insufficient. It is that the way the increase is integrated into daily life determines whether it improves financial position or simply funds a more expensive structure. The solution to the problem is not to reject higher income or aim lower. It is to separate income growth from automatic lifestyle expansion and to manage the job as a financial system with defined boundaries. This requires replacing intuitive adaptation with explicit rules. The first step is to calculate net role income. This means taking gross salary and subtracting all costs required to maintain the role. These costs include commuting, workday food, professional appearance, location-related housing premiums, and paid services that exist only because of time constraints. The result is a clearer measure of what the job actually produces. This calculation should be updated annually, not continuously, to avoid over-optimization. The second step is to set a lifestyle ceiling tied to income growth. A practical rule is to allow no more than 30–40% of any raise to translate into higher recurring expenses. The remaining portion is protected for savings, investment, or flexibility. This rule prevents the raise from being fully absorbed by structural costs. It does not restrict one-time upgrades. It limits permanent expansion. The third step is to prioritize structural changes over behavioral control. Instead of repeatedly trying to reduce spending through effort, the goal is to reduce the conditions that create spending pressure. For example, negotiating 1 or 2 remote days per week reduces commuting, food, and time-related costs simultaneously. Adjusting work hours can reduce peak pricing for transportation and services. Standardizing professional purchases limits recurring upgrades. Each change reduces multiple expense categories at once. This system works mechanically because it reduces the number of decisions that rely on discipline. Once boundaries are set, spending aligns automatically. There is less need for constant monitoring because the environment has been adjusted. This lowers the risk of backsliding during busy or stressful periods. The approach is stable because it does not rely on market timing, employer guarantees, or future promotions. It improves cash flow by lowering recurring expenses rather than increasing income expectations. Lower fixed costs increase resilience. If income changes, the financial system absorbs the shock more easily. Importantly, this solution does not assume immediate or radical action. It is designed for gradual implementation. One structural change per year can materially improve net outcomes without destabilizing work or lifestyle. Over time, these changes compound. When income growth is paired with controlled lifestyle expansion, higher pay begins to function as intended. It increases margin instead of pressure. The job stops consuming its own value, and income becomes a tool for building financial stability rather than maintaining a more expensive routine. When the full analysis is put together, the reason a $90,000 salary can feel worse than $70,000 becomes clear. The problem is not the income level, it is the absence of a system that separates income growth from automatic cost expansion. Without that separation, higher pay stabilizes a more expensive structure instead of improving financial position. The framework to avoid this outcome has four elements. First, every role should be evaluated by net role income, not gross salary. This means subtracting all role-dependent costs from pay, commuting, workday food, professional appearance, location premiums, and time replacement services. This number reflects what the job actually contributes to savings and flexibility. Without it, salary comparisons remain incomplete. Second, income increases require predefined boundaries. A raise should be divided intentionally before lifestyle adjusts. A practical rule is to protect at least 60-70% of any raise from recurring expense growth. The remaining portion can be used for upgrades if they are deliberate. This prevents the raise from disappearing into fixed costs. Third, lifestyle efficiency must be treated as a constraint, not a preference. When recurring costs rise beyond a defined share of income, structural changes are required. These changes target the conditions that generate spending, schedule rigidity, commute frequency, and role expectations, rather than individual purchases. This keeps adjustments stable over time. Fourth, flexibility should be recognized as a financial asset. Roles that preserve time, reduce spending pressure, and increase optionality. Time recovered from rigid schedules directly improves financial execution and reduces reliance on convenience spending. Now consider outcomes over time. After 1 year, the effect is visible in cash flow. By limiting expense expansion and implementing one structural change, many people preserve $4,000, $6,000 that would otherwise disappear. Financial reviews become clearer because income increases translate into measurable surplus. After 5 years, the difference compounds. Preserving $5,000 per year and allocating it consistently produces $30,000 or $35,000 in additional capital at moderate returns. More importantly, fixed lifestyle pressure remains controlled. Career decisions feel less constrained by financial obligations. After 10 years, the impact is structural. Net worth can be 80,000, 120,000 higher, compared to a path where raises were absorbed by recurring costs. Optionality increases. Work intensity can be adjusted, roles can change, and risk becomes manageable. The immediate steps are simple. Calculate your current net role income, review the last raise, and identify how much became fixed cost. Set a boundary for future income increases. Identify one structural adjustment that reduces recurring expenses within the next year. This approach does not require lowering ambition or rejecting higher pay. It requires integrating income into a system that preserves its value. When that system exists, higher salaries stop feeling disappointing and start producing tangible progress.